Hello, welcome to this paper session, How Software Architects Focus Their Attention for EXA 2021. Quick introductions. I'm Eoin Woods. I'm presenting the paper today. I'm the CTO at Endava. Got quite a lot of software engineering experience before that. I'm the author of a couple of software architecture books, and I've been involved in the software architecture research community as well as practice for quite a long time. Today, as well as my day job, I'm a visiting researcher at the University of East London's Centre for Enterprise Computing. My co-author, this is joint work with Rabih Bashroush. He's also today in industry, head of IT infrastructure advisory at Uptime Institute, but he's also a professor at UEL, and he's the director of the UEL Centre for Enterprise Computing. The content of, that we'll be talking about today is what question were we trying to answer with this research? What was the study structure? What were the 4 phases we went through? We'll go through the first 2 phases more quickly because we reported those before, and we'll spend a little bit more time on phases 3 and 4. And then what are our conclusions and future work? So where did we start? What question were we trying to answer? Well, we've observed in our research and practice, software architecture is a broad field. Architects are always busy. I find that myself. You're always busy on a project because there's always too much to do. There's any number of things that you could go and focus on. The problem, if you get the wrong focus, you get a reduced impact. You won't be as effective. And yet, when we looked around, we realized there wasn't much written advice for new architects to guide them in this. And yet, experienced practitioners seem to get this right. They are effective and they do pick the right things to work on. So we wondered how they did it. And was there any commonality, or did everybody have a secret way that they did it themselves? So we decided to ask them. There were a few other people who've looked at this. Philippe Krypton back in 2008 wrote quite an informed piece based on his experience with a number of architecture groups as to what do software architects actually do in his experience. George Fairbanks wrote a very good book introducing software architecture to teams and stressing to teams the need to take a risk-driven approach to software architecture. And many of you will be familiar with Elschel Poort and Hans van Vliet's work on RCDA, which of course guides the architect to use risk and cost to change their architecture work into a flow of decisions so that they're constantly prioritizing based on the most important things. But these didn't necessarily capture what the general community does. Not everybody uses RCDA. Not everyone has read George Fairbanks's book. Not everyone has got the same experiences as Philippe's former colleagues. What did everybody else do? To do this, we ran a study with 4 phases. We interviewed some expert practitioners, and from that we analysed the interviews and we built an initial model, a model for prioritising architecture effort, and we published that at EXA 2017. Then since then, we moved on to phase 3. We validated that model via survey, quite a large survey of practitioners, and from some insights gained in that survey, we refined the model further. That was phase 4, and that's what's being reported in this paper. Phase 1 and 2 then, to recap them, the 2017 paper, of course, describes them in a bit more detail. The expert practitioner interviews were done with 7 experienced architects that we knew in our network. They really were experienced. They were the least experienced at 10 years of industrial experience, the most experienced 35, and they were from 4 different countries, which also helped us with a bit of diversity. It was Germany, Switzerland, USA, and UK. And we simply asked them, how can architects concentrate their attention so that they are as effective as possible? And it was an open-ended, interactive interview, which we followed with a grounded theory-style analysis. We didn't try and lead them into particular areas, we let them talk. We had a couple of follow-up questions if they didn't know how to answer or they weren't quite sure what we were asking, but we just let them talk, really, as we asked further questions. And somewhat to our surprise, when we analysed those interviews, we found 3 strong themes emerged: the importance of understanding stakeholder needs for prioritization, prioritizing time according to your risks, and delegating as much as possible. None of those perhaps being novel, but the fact that 7 experienced architects all seemed to use some mix of them was a bit of a surprise to us. So we created an initial model, as I say, it was both published on LinkedIn and in the previous paper, that had 3, 4, and 2 specific heuristics for the different areas, which were mined out of the results of the study. Briefly, with stakeholders, it's consider the whole stakeholder community, not just your favorites. Make sure the delivery team are remembered, they're important stakeholders, and understand the perspective of people we call the acquirers. The interviewees would normally call that the business. When looking at prioritizing time according to risks, consider your external dependencies. Look for novel aspects of the domain, the problem or the solution, stuff you haven't seen before. identify high impact decisions, and analyze your local situation for risks. And then delegate as much as possible. Empower the development teams so that architecture is a shared enterprise. It's a role, it's activity, it's not about an individual, and create groups across the teams to take architectural decisions. So that was our model, published out on LinkedIn, gained a bit of publicity for it. And then we ran a survey of practitioners to find out what people thought of it. Was it useful? Had we missed anything? So we created a survey, a web-based survey, as you'd expect, with both open and closed-ended questions. The closed-ended questions were to try and specifically find out what people thought. I mean, is this useful? What, would you use it? Those kind of questions. And the open-ended ones being, have you got any comments? Have we missed anything? I'll show you the questions in a moment. 84 people completed the survey, all from industry, apart from people working as software architects in government organizations, which we viewed as another kind of industry. 55% from Europe, 30% from the Americas, and that would be 15%, if my maths is correct, from the rest of the world. So we do have a bit of a skew towards Europe and Americas, but even if we only have a model that works in those regions, that's still valuable. And actually, we didn't, at a micro level, we didn't see a huge divergence of opinion with the other correspondents. And 70% of the people who responded had at least 15 years experience, which was reassuring. We were getting the voice of experience, although we didn't say that inexperienced people couldn't fill it in. And obviously people with experience were interested in this area. These are the questions we put in the survey. It was quite simple, though the open-ended questions got quite long responses in some cases. It's a bit of an eye test here. By all means, feel free to read it in the paper. But briefly what we're saying is this similar to the way you work today? Would you find this useful in your work or implicitly with others? And have we missed any areas of risk in the prioritized time according to risks? And then the open-ended questions are, if there are other areas of risks, what are they? Can you describe them to us? Have we missed any factors from the model entirely? Maybe your experience is very different to ours. And are there any other comments? In other words, what do you think of it? The closed-ended questions ended up validating the model well. 75% of people said it was very similar or quite similar to how they work today. And 70% of people also said it was definitely or probably useful. So we took that as a good positive result. The open-ended questions, however, indicated that work was required. One entire missing theme emerged, which was team effectiveness. When we analysed the results of the open-ended questions, about 12, when we ended up with that analysis and worked out what was being said across them with our coding, about 12% indicated it was a focus area that we had missed. There were other suggestions for focus areas, but that was the only one that was more than 10% of the respondents. So we thought that's clearly something we have missed if more than 10% of our respondents think we've missed it. And so we mined 4 new heuristics from the responses. We also got some new risk areas, and we, based on a number of comments in the open-ended questions, we altered the representation to stress that it's a continuous process. People said that the 3 stacked graphical shapes made it look a bit like a linear process, whereas of course architecture is extremely iterative. So the model we ended up with isn't very much an extension of what we had before, but it's drawn differently. So stakeholder needs and priorities is really the same. Delegating as much as possible is really the same. Prioritizing time according to risks has got a couple more risks in it, but it's fundamentally very similar. And there's a new area, which is making sure that your team is effective. And the heuristics people spotted there were develop the team through mentoring, achieve team diversity for better innovation and problem solving, remove blockers that prevent team progress, not necessarily something every architect would immediately think of, but a lot of these respondents thought that was a really important thing architects could do. And interestingly, address dysfunction in teams. Again, perhaps not something we naturally think of architects doing, but of course architects often work across the teams. They're highly respected members of technical staff. And if there is a problem in how the team's working internally, maybe they're a bit less close to it actually than a scrum master or a team leader or a project manager. Perhaps actually they're really well placed to step in and be that voice of reason, voice of experience that's just a little bit detached from maybe the emotion of the situation to help the team change their working practices and work together better. So what were our conclusions? Originally, we wondered, how do architects prioritize their time to maximize their effectiveness? So we decided to ask them. And somewhat to our surprise in the original study, some strong themes and specific shared heuristics emerged. So we created a model that captured that advice, and then we validated via a survey of practicing architects. This resulted in a good validation of the model, but also it indicated we had work to do. We were missing an important aspect of the model and a couple of important refinements. So we refined the model created. It produced the model I've just showed you in one of the 4 quadrants. We shared it via LinkedIn and with this paper for the research community. So in terms of future work, I think in the paper we said the future work was to share it. We have shared it. We originally shared the first model in 2017, and we have more recently shared the updated model via LinkedIn, which got a bit more attention than the first model, a few more shares, and quite a number of interesting comments, which suggests some real degree of engagement, which we were quite pleased with. At this stage, we're not proposing to do any more research studies, although we are open to collaboration if other people are interested in this too. What instead we plan to do is to try and get it out to practitioners. We don't think there'll be a huge appetite for conference talks on just this topic, but we aim to integrate it into conference talks about improving software architecture practice, which are quite popular. And we hope we'll be able to reach quite a few practitioners that way, given that the model has validated well with the practitioner community. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that was interesting.